They say no good deed goes unpunished. For single mother Dr. Imani Hayes, that wasn't just a saying, it became her living nightmare. On a flight to Seattle, she and her children performed a miracle, saving a man's life at 35,000 feet. But her reward wasn't praise. It was a multi-million-dollar lawsuit that shattered her career and painted her as a reckless criminal. Hunted by a powerful legal team and abandoned by her colleagues, she was pushed to the brink. Little did she know, this cruel twist of fate was actually an elaborate test, orchestrated by the very man she saved, to see if her goodness was real, a test that would lead to a staggering, life-altering verdict. The recycled air of the Delta flight from Atlanta to Seattle tasted of stale coffee and faint anxiety, a familiar cocktail to any frequent flyer. But for Dr. Imani Hayes, it tasted like freedom. It was a temporary, budget-class, middle-seat kind of freedom, but freedom nonetheless. For the past 6 years since her husband had passed, her life had been a carefully constructed fortress of routine and responsibility. Wake up at 5 a.m., get Noah and Maya ready, drop them off, endure a grueling 12-hour shift in the chaotic crucible of an inner-city emergency room. Pick them up, homework, dinner, collapse, repeat. Her hands, calloused from both years of medical practice and from gripping the steering wheel of her aging Honda, rested on her lap. They were capable hands. They had set bones, stitched wounds, and restarted hearts. They had also packed lunches, tied shoelaces, and wiped away tears. Tonight, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, they were still. Beside her, 14-year-old Noah was already lost in his own world, oversized headphones cupping his ears, his lanky frame folded uncomfortably into the seat. His fingers danced over the screen of his phone, a blur of activity. He communicated in a series of grunts and monosyllabic affirmations, a language Imani was still struggling to master. Yet she saw the boy he was beneath the teenage armor, fiercely protective, wickedly smart, and carrying a quiet grief for the father he barely remembered. In the window seat, 9-year-old Maya was the complete opposite. Her face, a perfect miniature of Imani's, was pressed against the triple-pane glass, her breath fogging a small circle. "Mommy, the clouds look like cotton candy," she whispered, her voice filled with a genuine wonder that Imani desperately wanted to protect from the world. Maya saw magic everywhere, a trait that both enchanted and worried her mother. The world had a way of wringing the magic out of you. This trip to visit Imani's sister was a splurge, funded by a tax refund and a string of exhausting overtime shifts. It was a necessary exhale after years of holding her breath. She was drowning in student loan debt, the mortgage was a constant weight, and the emotional toll of the ER was beginning to fray the edges of her soul. She saw so much pain, so much tragedy, that some days she felt like a ghost haunting the halls of the living. She needed this. They needed this. A week of being anti-Imani, not Dr. Hayes, a week where the most pressing emergency would be running out of pancake syrup. As the plane reached its cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign pinged off, a fragile sense of peace settled over her. She closed her eyes, letting the low drone of the engines lull her. Across the aisle and one row up sat a man who seemed entirely out of place. He was in his late 60s, dressed in a simple, well-worn tweed jacket and gray slacks, clothes that suggested a retired professor or a librarian, not a titan of industry. His face was a roadmap of deep lines, his hair a shock of wiry white. He stared out the window with a profound stillness, a stark contrast to the fidgeting and chattering of the other passengers. He hadn't brought a book or a tablet. He just sat, watching the world drift by below. His name was Arthur Pendleton, and his net worth was greater than the GDP of several small countries. As the CEO and founder of Pendleton Industries, a sprawling global conglomerate with interests in everything from pharmaceuticals to aerospace technology, he was a man accustomed to private jets, fawning assistants, and a life insulated from the inconveniences of public travel. But twice a year, he made this pilgrimage to Seattle under a pseudonym, flying commercial to visit his estranged daughter, a stubborn artist who despised his wealth and everything it represented. It was his penance, his reminder of a world he had long since left behind. Maya's voice, clear as a bell, cut through Imani's dozing. "Mommy, that man looks sad." Imani's eyes fluttered open. She followed Maya's gaze to the man in the tweed jacket. Shh, sweetie. It's not polite to point. But he does, Maya insisted quietly. His eyes are empty. Imani looked again. From this angle, she could see the tension in his jaw, the slight tremor in the hand that rested on his knee. Maya was right. It wasn't just sadness. It was a deep, soul-crushing weariness. It was a look Imani knew well. She saw it in the eyes of patients who had just received a terminal diagnosis, in the faces of families who had lost everything. It was the look of a man carrying an invisible, unbearable weight. She felt a familiar professional pang of concern, but quickly suppressed it. Not your patient, not your problem. You are on vacation. She gave Maya's hand a squeeze and offered a weak smile. Maybe he's just tired, baby. Let's try to get some rest. The flight continued uneventfully for another hour. The beverage service came and went. The cabin lights dimmed. Noah was asleep, his head lolling against the seat back, a faint snore escaping his lips. Maya was coloring in a book, her brow furrowed in concentration. Imani allowed herself to finally, truly relax. She was just a mom on a plane with her kids. The world of beeping monitors and life-or-death decisions was a million miles away, or so she thought. The first sign of trouble was subtle, a slight gasp, sharp and quickly swallowed. Imani's senses, honed by years of ER triage, flickered to life. Her head snapped up, her eyes scanning the dimly lit cabin. It came from across the aisle. Arthur Pendleton had shifted in his seat. His right hand was now pressed firmly against his chest, his knuckles white. His face, already pale, had taken on a grayish, ashen hue under the faint cabin lighting. Maya tugged on Imani's sleeve. "Mommy, look!" Her voice was a small, frightened whisper. The man's other hand came up to loosen his collar. His breathing was becoming audible now, short, ragged pants. He was trying to be quiet, to not draw attention, but his body was betraying him. Imani's professional instincts overrode every other thought. The vacation, the exhaustion, the desire for anonymity. It all evaporated. She unbuckled her seatbelt. "Noah, wake up," she said, her voice low but firm, shaking his shoulder. He grumbled, pulling an earbud out. "Huh? What's up?" "I need you to watch your sister. Stay right here. Don't move." Before he could protest, Imani was in the aisle, kneeling beside Arthur Pendleton's seat. "Sir," she said, touching his arm gently. "Sir, my name is Dr. Imani Hayes. I'm a physician. Are you all right?" Arthur's eyes, wide with a mixture of pain and panic, focused on her. He tried to speak, but only a wheezing sound came out. He pointed a trembling finger at his chest. "Okay, okay," Imani said, her voice a calm, authoritative force that cut through his panic. "I'm here to help you. Can you tell me what you're feeling?" "Chest. Crushing," he managed to rasp, each word an immense effort. "Left arm. Classic myocardial infarction symptoms." Her brain supplied instantly. A heart attack. Here, trapped in a metal tube 7 miles above the earth. "Flight attendant," Imani called out, her voice projecting through the cabin. "I need a flight attendant, now, and I need your onboard medical kit." A harried-looking flight attendant with a name tag that read Brenda bustled over. "Ma'am, please return to your seat. This man is having a medical emergency, likely a heart attack," Imani stated, leaving no room for argument. "I am an emergency room doctor. Get me your medical kit and any oxygen you have on board and notify the pilot. We need to find the nearest airport to divert to immediately." Brenda's eyes widened, her practiced customer service smile faltering. She saw the absolute certainty in Imani's face and scurried off toward the cockpit. Imani turned back to Arthur. "Sir, what's your name?" "Arthur," he whispered. "Okay, Arthur. Have you ever had heart problems before? Are you on any medication?" He shook his head weakly. "No, nothing." This was bad. A first-time event with no medical history to go on. The flight attendant returned with a red box and a small green oxygen tank. Imani snapped the box open, her eyes quickly taking inventory. Aspirin, nitroglycerin spray, a basic stethoscope, a blood pressure cuff, an automated external defibrillator, AED. It was rudimentary, but it was something. Noah, she called over her shoulder. Noah was on his feet, his face pale, watching the scene unfold. I need your help. I need you to talk to the people around us. Keep them calm. Tell them a doctor is handling it, and to please give us space. Noah, who usually retreated in social situations, found a new resolve. He nodded, his expression serious. He turned to the rubbernecking passengers and began speaking in a clear, steady voice, his initial fear replaced by a sense of purpose. Imani worked fast. She gave Arthur 4 baby aspirin to chew. This will help thin your blood, Arthur. Try to relax. She fumbled with the blood pressure cuff, wrapping it around his arm and inflating it. The reading was terrifyingly high. His heart was straining, fighting for every beat. I'm going to give you some nitroglycerin, Arthur. It goes under your tongue. It might give you a headache, but it will help open up your blood vessels. She administered the spray. For a moment, there was a flicker of relief in his eyes. His breathing eased slightly, but it was short-lived. Suddenly, his whole body seized. His eyes rolled back in his head, and a deep, guttural sound escaped his throat. His head slumped against the window. He's in cardiac arrest, Imani shouted. Help me get him into the aisle. We need to start CPR. The passenger next to Arthur, a terrified young man, scrambled out of his seat. Together, they managed to pull Arthur's limp body onto the narrow floor of the aisle. The cabin erupted in a low murmur of panic. Maya, sweetie, close your eyes, Imani ordered, her voice strained. She ripped open Arthur's shirt, exposing his chest. Is there anyone here who knows CPR? She yelled to the cabin. Silence. She placed her hands on his sternum, interlaced her fingers, and began the brutal rhythmic work of compressions. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. She counted aloud, the force of each push jarring her own body. Brenda, the flight attendant, reappeared, her face ashen. The pilot is diverting to Salt Lake City. ETA is 25 minutes. 25 minutes, an eternity. Get the AED ready, Imani commanded between compressions. Attach the pads as shown on the diagram. Brenda, her hands shaking, fumbled with the device. Noah, seeing her struggle, stepped in. I'll do it. He had seen these used in health class videos. He quickly tore open the pads and pressed them firmly onto Arthur's chest, one on the upper right, one on the lower left. The machine whirred to life. A synthesized voice commanded, Analyzing heart rhythm, do not touch the patient. Imani pulled her hands back, her lungs burning, sweat stinging her eyes. The seconds stretched into an abyss of silence, broken only by the hum of the engines. Shock advised, the machine announced. Charging. Stand clear. A high-pitched whine filled the air. Push the orange button now. Imani glanced around. The passengers were frozen, their faces illuminated by the flashing orange light. Everybody clear, she yelled. She took a deep breath and pressed the button. Arthur's body arched violently off the floor with a sickening thud, then fell slack. For a horrifying second, there was nothing. No breath, no movement. Imani's heart sank. Then he took a huge, shuddering gasp. Color began to seep back into his face. His eyelids fluttered. We have a pulse, Imani whispered, her fingers pressed against his carotid artery. It's weak, but it's there. Relief, so potent it was dizzying, washed over her. She didn't stop. She fitted the oxygen mask over his face and continued to monitor him, her hand never leaving his wrist, counting the beats, willing his heart to keep going. Maya had disobeyed. Her eyes were wide open and tears streamed silently down her cheeks. She crept forward and, with a tentative hand, reached out and took Arthur's limp one. She just held it, her small fingers wrapped around his. For the next 20 minutes, which felt like 20 years, Imani, Noah, and Maya formed an unlikely life-saving trinity in the aisle of a Boeing 737. Imani was the mind and hands, the calm center of the storm. Noah was the shield, managing the crowd and assisting with the equipment. And Maya was the heart, offering a silent, human connection to a man on the brink of death. When the plane finally touched down with a jarring thump at Salt Lake City International Airport, the paramedics were already waiting on the tarmac. They stormed the cabin, a whirlwind of professional efficiency. Imani gave them a rapid-fire, concise report. Symptoms, vitals, interventions, timeline. They nodded, impressed, loaded Arthur onto a stretcher, and whisked him away. As they carried him off, Arthur's eyes briefly met Imani's. He tried to mouth something, a word lost in the oxygen mask. Then he was gone. The cabin broke into spontaneous, thunderous applause. Passengers reached out to touch Imani's shoulder, murmuring words of awe and thanks. But Imani barely heard them. She was running on pure adrenaline, her body trembling with exhaustion and the aftermath of the crisis. She sank into her seat, pulling her two children into a fierce hug. Noah was shaking slightly. Maya was sobbing quietly into her shoulder. "You were so brave," Imani whispered to them, her voice thick with emotion. "Both of you. I am so, so proud of you." They had done it. They had saved a man's life. In the exhausted, adrenaline-soaked aftermath, surrounded by the gratitude of strangers, Imani felt a flicker of profound satisfaction. It was a feeling that would be extinguished all too soon. The rest of the trip to Seattle was lived under a strange, shimmering haze. The airline, in a gesture of profound gratitude and perhaps shrewd public relations, had bumped the Hayes family to the front of the plane for the connecting flight. They were cocooned in the plush leather of first-class seats, plied with warm towels, real glassware, and the solicitous attention of a flight crew who regarded Imani with undisguised awe. Noah, for once, was impressed, examining the intricate seat controls with an engineer's curiosity. Maya was enchanted by the hot fudge sundae that came in a real ceramic bowl, but for Imani the luxury felt hollow, almost insulting. The contrast between this sudden opulence and the raw, visceral reality of what had occurred in the aisle of another plane just hours earlier was too jarring. Her sister Claire met them at the gate at SeaTac with enveloping hugs, already aware of the broad strokes of the story from a frantic phone call Imani had made from the Salt Lake City airport. For a week, Claire's cozy home in Fremont became their sanctuary. They visited Pike Place Market, rode the ferry to Bainbridge Island, and hiked through the dense green forests of the Pacific Northwest. They tried to manufacture the perfect restorative vacation they had planned, but the incident was a ghost that haunted their holiday. At night, after the children were asleep, Imani would sit with her sister in the quiet living room, a mug of chamomile tea growing cold in her hands, and the dam would break. She replayed every second in excruciating detail. "Did I check for a medical alert bracelet? I think I did, but it all happened so fast," she'd murmur, staring at the wall. "The aspirin. What if he had a bleeding ulcer I didn't know about? And the nitroglycerin, maybe his pressure was dropping faster than I could read it, and I pushed him over the edge." "Imani, stop," Claire would insist, her voice gentle but firm. "You're a doctor, not a psychic." The man's heart stopped. "You started it again. That's the beginning and the end of the story." Logically, Imani knew her sister was right, but the ingrained culture of medical review, of morbidity and mortality conferences, where every decision was dissected under a harsh light, was too deeply embedded in her psyche. She had acted in the field, a lone combat medic with none of her usual support. The second guessing was a torment she couldn't escape. The children processed the trauma in their own ways. Noah became quieter, more watchful. He'd be scrolling on his phone, and Imani would see his face darken. He was searching for news of the man, of the flight. He once showed her a local Salt Lake City news report. Unidentified passenger on Delta flight recovering at University of Utah Hospital after mid-air medical emergency. The man's name was still unreleased. He was a ghost, a question mark. Maya, meanwhile, tried to capture the event in her own language. Art. Her coloring books were filled with drawings of airplanes. In some, a smiling woman in a purple shirt, the color Imani had been wearing, was holding a man's hand. But in others, the plane was dark, surrounded by jagged, angry storm clouds, with small figures huddled inside. She didn't speak of it, but her crayons told the story. Their return to Atlanta was a return to a life that no longer fit quite right. The news of Imani's heroism had preceded her. A short blurb in the hospital's internal newsletter celebrated her quick thinking and bravery. Colleagues in the ER greeted her with handshakes and impressed smiles. "Heard you joined the Mile High Club, Hayes?" one of the veteran surgeons joked. "The CPR division." She accepted the praise with a strained humility, feeling like an imposter. They were celebrating a clean, simple narrative of heroism. They hadn't seen the gray pallor of Arthur's skin, hadn't felt the sickening crack of ribs under her hands, hadn't seen the terror in her own children's eyes. For 2 weeks, a fragile normality asserted itself. The bills were still piled high, the shifts were still exhausting, but the memory of the flight began to recede, like a scar that was beginning to fade. Imani even allowed herself to feel a sliver of pride. She had faced the ultimate test of her skills and had not been found wanting. She had shown her children what it meant to step up, to care for a stranger. That fragile peace was shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. The courier was a young man in a crisp uniform, holding a digital scanner in a stiff, cream-colored cardboard envelope. The sender was a name that meant nothing to her. Thorne Calloway and Finch, LLP, with an address on Park Avenue, New York City. "Must be a thank you," she mumbled to herself, a small smile touching her lips. She had wondered about the man, Arthur. She hoped he was okay. She signed the scanner and took the package inside, placing it on the kitchen counter amidst the mail and Maya's school flyers. She poured herself a glass of water before slitting it open with a letter opener. The paper inside was heavy, impossibly formal. Her eyes scanned the opening lines. "Dear Dr. Imani Hayes, this firm represents Mr. Arthur Pendleton in the matter of the medical event, which occurred on Delta Flight 1251 on July 16th. We are writing to inform you that we are hereby initiating legal action against you for medical malpractice, gross negligence, and grievous bodily harm sustained by our client as a direct result of your unsolicited and ill-equipped intervention." The glass of water slipped from Imani's hand, shattering on the tile floor. The sound barely registered. Her entire world had just tilted on its axis. She sank into a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Malpractice, negligence. The words were venomous, alien. It was a mistake. It had to be a sick, twisted, impossible mistake. With a trembling hand, she picked the letter back up. Her eyes devoured the cold, clinical prose. The letter, signed by a Cassandra Thorne, senior partner, laid out the charges in brutal detail. It claimed her administration of CPR was unnecessarily violent and improperly performed, leading to 3 compound rib fractures and a punctured pleura. It alleged that the nitroglycerin spray, given without knowledge of Mr. Pendleton's underlying conditions, had induced a hypotensive crisis that resulted in a minor but significant cerebral hemorrhage, complicating his recovery and potentially leading to long-term cognitive impairment. The final paragraph was the kill shot. "We will be seeking compensatory and punitive damages in the amount of $5 million, $5,000 USD. $5 million. The number was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. It was an amount designed not just to bankrupt her, but to annihilate her, to erase her from existence. She thought of her mortgage, her mountain of student debt, the small savings account she was so proud of. It was like threatening to put out a campfire with an ocean. Her first call was to the hospital's chief legal counsel, a man named Gerald who had always been cordial in the hallway. His tone on the phone was instantly different. It was cautious, distant, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Imani, this is, unfortunate," he said, the word hanging in the air like a bad smell. "I'll be frank, Good Samaritan laws are complicated. They're designed to protect lay people, not practicing physicians who announce themselves as such. You're held to the full standard of professional care." "But I provided the standard of care, Gerald. I saved his life." "According to his very expensive lawyers, you didn't. They'll hire a legion of medical experts who will testify that in that specific situation, your actions were reckless. And as for our malpractice insurance, the policy is very specific. It covers your practice within the hospital or at hospital-sanctioned events. It does not cover freelance medical emergencies on commercial airlines. You were acting as a private citizen. I'm sorry. You're going to need your own counsel." The final nail was driven in the next day. She was called into the hospital administrator's office. Gerald was there, looking uncomfortable. The administrator, a woman with a reputation for ruthless efficiency, didn't mince words. "Dr. Hayes, in light of the pending litigation and the potential for negative publicity, we're placing you on indefinite paid administrative leave, pending a full internal review." It was a firing, wrapped in the sterile language of corporate procedure. She was being cast out. As she walked back to the ER to collect her personal items from her locker, the whispers followed her. The colleagues who had been clapping her on the back a week ago now averted their eyes, suddenly fascinated by their charts or the scuff marks on their shoes. She was no longer a hero. She was a liability, contaminated. Within a week, the story hit the national news wires. But this time, the narrative was masterfully shaped by Thorne, Calloway, and Finch. The headlines were brutal. The Samaritan suit, ailing tycoon sues doctor for botched mid-flight rescue. Hero or hazard, questions mount over doctor's aggressive methods at 35,000 feet. The public, fickle and hungry for drama, turned on her instantly. Anonymous commenters, armed with the ferocious certainty of ignorance, became judge and jury. She probably broke his ribs on purpose to seem like a hero. Typical arrogant doctor thinks she's God. I bet she was just trying to get money from a rich guy. The vitriol bled from the screen into her real life. One afternoon in the grocery store, a woman recognized her from a photo in an online article. "You're that doctor," the woman sneered, her voice loud enough for others to hear. "The one who almost killed that poor old man. You should be ashamed." Imani abandoned her cart and fled the store, her face burning with humiliation. The fortress of her family was crumbling from within. Noah discovered the comment sections and waged a furious, hopeless war against the trolls. Imani found him one night, his face illuminated by the glow of his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Noah, stop," she pleaded. "You can't fight them. It's pointless." "So we're just supposed to let them lie?" He shot back, his voice cracking with a pain that was deeper than anger. "They're calling you a monster, Mom. I was there. I saw what you did. You were amazing." Her heart broke for him, for his fierce, powerless loyalty. Maya's trauma was quieter, more insidious. The joyful drawings of airplanes vanished. She became withdrawn, anxious. One evening, Imani was tucking her into bed when Maya's small voice pierced the darkness. "Mommy? Did we hurt that man? The lady on the TV said you hurt him." Imani gathered her daughter into her arms, the small body trembling. She rocked her back and forth, whispering reassurances she no longer felt herself. "No, sweetie. No, we helped him. We helped him." But as she said the words, they tasted like ash in her mouth. They were taking everything from her, and now they were stealing her children's innocence, twisting a moment of grace into a source of shame. She found a lawyer through a legal aid referral. David Chen was a young, earnest public defender whose office was a chaotic landscape of teetering legal files. He listened to her story with genuine sympathy, but his eyes held the weary resignation of a man used to fighting Goliaths with slingshots that had no stones. "I'm not going to lie to you, Imani," he said, leaning back in his squeaky chair. "This is bad. Arthur Pendleton, the man is practically a myth. His personal wealth is staggering. His law firm, Thorne Calloway, is the legal equivalent of the Death Star. They will bury us in motions, depositions, and expert witness fees we can't possibly pay." He slid a printout of a particularly nasty article across the desk. "This is what they're doing. They're trying the case in the court of public opinion before we ever see a courtroom. By the time we get to a jury, you'll be painted as an incompetent, money-hungry predator." He sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. "They've offered to talk settlement. If you issue a full public apology, admit fault, and voluntarily surrender your license for a period of time, they might drop the financial suit." "Surrender my license? Apologize?" The words were unthinkable. "It's a way out, Imani," David pressed gently. "A humiliating one, yes. But it's a way to stop the bleeding, to protect what little you have left for your kids." Imani looked out his dusty window at the city below. She thought of Maya's question, of Noah's furious defense of her honor. If she surrendered, what would she be teaching them? That when powerful people tell lies, you bow your head and agree? That integrity is something you trade away for a quiet life? A cold, hard resolve settled deep in her bones, a bedrock beneath the fear. They had taken her job, her reputation, and her peace of mind. She would not let them take her soul. She turned back to David Chen, her eyes clear and defiant. "No," she said, her voice quiet but absolute. I will not apologize for doing the right thing. Tell them no deal. We're going to fight. David Chen stared at her, a long, appraising look. He saw the sheer cliffs of her conviction. He knew, with a sinking feeling, that they were marching into a battle they were destined to lose. But for the first time in a long time, he also felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in years. He felt proud of his client. "Okay, Dr. Hayes," he said, a slow, determined nod. "Okay, we fight." The morning of the deposition dawned cold and unforgiving. A curtain of gray drizzle fell over Atlanta, smearing the view from Imani's kitchen window into a watercolor of melancholy hues. The city's gloom was a perfect mirror for the storm inside her. She moved through the motions of the morning like an automaton, making coffee she couldn't taste, toasting bread she couldn't eat. Every nerve ending was alight with a specific, high-frequency dread. Today was the day her life would be formally dismantled, word by painful word. She chose her armor with care, a simple charcoal gray suit, severe in its cut, bought a decade ago for residency interviews in a lifetime that felt like it belonged to someone else. It was the most professional, most formidable thing she owned. As she looked at her reflection, she saw not a doctor, but a defendant. Her face was thinner than it had been a month ago, the shadows under her eyes like faint bruises. The children were unusually subdued, their morning chatter replaced by a watchful silence. They knew. They didn't understand the legal complexities of a deposition, but they understood this was a day of battle for their mother. As she was about to leave, Noah, now towering over her, pulled her into a hug that was fierce and protective. "Just tell the truth, Mom," he whispered into her hair. "You'll be okay." Maya, her small face etched with worry, tugged on her mother's sleeve. She pressed a small, smooth gray stone into Imani's palm and closed her fingers around it. "My lucky stone," she said seriously. "It keeps the monsters away." Imani knelt, her composure threatening to crack. "Thank you, baby." She kissed both of them, the simple, profound weight of their love both a crushing responsibility and her only source of strength. The feel of the stone in her hand was a tangible link to what she was fighting for. She slipped it into her suit pocket, a secret talisman against the monsters she was about to face. David Chen met her in the lobby of the downtown skyscraper, a gleaming monument of steel and glass that seemed designed to make people feel small. He looked as though he hadn't slept, his tie slightly askew, his briefcase threatening to spill its contents onto the marble floor. "They chose a neutral site, but it feels a lot like their home turf, doesn't it?" he muttered, gesturing at the cavernous, opulent lobby. "Just remember what we talked about. Answer only the question asked. Be concise. Don't volunteer information. And let me handle any objections." He was trying to sound confident, but Imani could hear the tremor in his voice. They were lambs walking into a lion's den. The elevator ride to the 40th floor was silent and suffocating. When the doors opened, they stepped into a hushed world of expensive carpet and panoramic views. The conference room was at the end of the hall, a glass-walled chamber that felt like a fishbowl. Inside, the mahogany table was so large it could have hosted a state dinner, and at its head, like a queen upon her throne, sat Cassandra Thorne. She was even more intimidating in person. Her silver hair was coiled in a tight chignon, not a single strand out of place. Her black suit was a marvel of tailoring, but it was her eyes that held the true power. They were the color of a frozen lake, and as they swept over Imani, they registered not a human being, but a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be dismantled. Two junior associates, a man and a woman who looked sharp, hungry, and utterly devoid of sentiment, sat flanking her, their laptops open and ready. A silent, grim-faced court stenographer was testing her machine in the corner. The air was thick with controlled, predatory power. "Dr. Hayes," Cassandra said, her voice a low, melodic purr that did nothing to conceal its razor's edge. "Thank you for joining us. Please, have a seat." Imani sat, the leather of the chair cold against her back. David arranged his meager files beside her, a pathetic little barricade against the legal firepower arrayed against them. The deposition began. For the first hour, Cassandra's questions were deceptively simple, almost gentle. She asked about Imani's medical school, her residency, her years in the ER. It was a careful, methodical construction of a foundation she fully intended to demolish. Imani answered calmly, concisely, just as David had instructed. Then the shift came. Cassandra leaned forward slightly, the first sign of an attack. Let's turn to the events of July 16th, Dr. Hayes. You stated that you identified yourself as a physician. Is that correct? Yes, I am a physician. An emergency room physician, to be precise. Accustomed to a certain environment, I imagine? A trauma bay, nurses, crash carts, full diagnostic capabilities, monitors, all the tools of your trade. Yes. And you had none of those tools available to you on that flight, did you? You had a rudimentary kit, an oxygen bottle, and an AED. Is that an accurate summary? Yes, it is. So you were, in essence, operating far outside your normal professional environment. Would you agree? I was operating within the bounds of my medical training to save a life in crisis, Imani countered, her voice firm. Cassandra gave a slight, dismissive smile. Your opinion is noted. Let's talk about your decisions. You administered acetylsalicylic acid, aspirin. Were you aware if Mr. Pendleton was on blood thinners? If he had a history of gastrointestinal bleeding? I was not. The patient was non-responsive and unable to provide a history. The risk of inaction in a suspected cardiac event far outweighed the potential contraindications. Again, your opinion. This firm retained Dr. Alistair Finch of Johns Hopkins, a leading cardiologist, to review the incident report. He states, and I quote, "To administer aspirin in such a scenario without any patient history is a gamble, not a medical decision." How do you respond to the assessment of an expert like Dr. Finch? Imani's hand tightened around the stone in her pocket. I respond that Dr. Finch was not on that airplane. He was not looking at a dying man. I was. Cassandra moved on, relentless. Let's discuss the nitroglycerin. You administered it, and shortly thereafter, Mr. Pendleton's condition worsened before he went into full arrest. Our neurological consultant, Dr. Evelyn Reed, suggests this was not a coincidence. Her report posits that your administration of a powerful vasodilator likely caused a sudden drop in blood pressure, inducing a hypotensive state that led to the cerebral hemorrhage Mr. Pendleton suffered. You essentially caused a brain bleed, Dr. Hayes. Did that possibility ever cross your mind? I was treating an active heart attack. Nitroglycerin is a standard of care? In a hospital! Cassandra's voice snapped like a whip, the velvet glove finally coming off. Not in a pressurized tube 7 miles in the sky. You were playing God, Dr. Hayes, with a man's life and a box of medical supplies you barely understood. That is not true, Imani said, her own voice rising, a tremor of anger running through it. David placed a calming hand on her arm. For another 2 hours, the assault continued. Cassandra twisted every action, reframed every decision as reckless and arrogant. She brought up the broken ribs, describing them in graphic detail, painting Imani as a brute. And then she went for the jugular. Dr. Hayes, you were flying coach, correct? On a budget ticket for a family vacation? Yes. And yet you chose to intervene in the case of a man in the row ahead of you. Were you aware at any point during the incident of who Mr. Pendleton was? No, his name was Arthur. That's all I knew. You didn't recognize him? Arthur Pendleton, founder of Pendleton Industries? One of the most influential and wealthiest men in the country? It never occurred to you that a successful intervention might be financially rewarding? The accusation hung in the air, vile and suffocating. David shot to his feet. Objection. Counsel is badgering the witness and impugning her character with baseless, offensive speculation. Cassandra waved a dismissive hand. Your objection is noted for the record, Mr. Chen. Please control yourself. She turned her icy gaze back to Imani. So, you're saying the thought never crossed your mind? You, a single mother struggling with debt, saw a wealthy-looking man in distress and didn't see an opportunity? That was it. The final straw. The rage that Imani had been suppressing, a clean, righteous anger, burned away the fear. She looked past Cassandra, at the panoramic view of the city, at the world that had turned against her, and she thought of her children. When she spoke, her voice was low, but it filled the room with an astonishing power. For the last month, you have systematically destroyed my life. You've taken my job, you've slandered my name in the press, and you have terrified my children. And now you sit here in your expensive suit in your glass tower, and you dare to question my motives. So let me be perfectly clear. She leaned forward. I did not see a wealthy man. I saw a human being whose skin was the color of ash, who was clutching his chest and gasping for air. I saw a man who was dying, and in that moment, my finances, my vacation, and my own fear did not matter. What mattered was the oath I swore when I became a doctor, an oath that I assume is a foreign concept in this room. It's an oath to preserve life whenever and wherever you are able. I did not intervene to get a reward. I intervened because it was my duty. I intervened because it was the right thing to do. She was shaking now, not from fear, but from the force of her own conviction. You talk about broken ribs. I will tell you about the feeling of a human heart stopping under your hands and the miracle of feeling it start again. You bring up experts with their hindsight and their theories. They weren't there. They didn't see the panic. They didn't have to make a choice in seconds that meant the difference between life and death. I did. And I would do it again. 1,000 times over, I would do it again. She finally paused, her breathing heavy. So take your lawsuit, take your experts, take your lies, and do your worst. You can make me bankrupt, but you cannot make me a liar. You cannot make me regret saving a man's life. My children were on that plane. They saw what I did, and I will not dishonor myself or them by apologizing for it. Ever. An absolute ringing silence descended on the room. The court stenographer's fingers were frozen above her keys. David Chen was staring at Imani, his mouth agape. The two junior associates looked genuinely stunned. Cassandra Thorne's cold, professional mask finally cracked. An expression that was not triumph, but something else entirely. Something that looked almost like approval flickered in her eyes. She held Imani's furious, tear-streaked gaze for a long, charged moment. And then a side door to the conference room clicked open. Arthur Pendleton entered, looking precisely as he had in Imani's memory, but resurrected. He was hale and vibrant, wearing a simple but exquisitely cut gray suit. He moved with the quiet, confident energy of a man who commanded worlds. He walked to the head of the table and placed a hand on Cassandra's shoulder. "Thank you, Cassandra," he said, his voice a calm, deep baritone that cut through the tension. "I believe we have our answer. That will be all." As if on cue, Cassandra Thorne, the legal predator, began to close her files with a quiet snap. Her associates, looking utterly bewildered, followed suit. Imani stared, her mind unable to bridge the gap between the man she had just been told was suing her for his life and the man now standing before her. David Chen looked back and forth between them, his expression one of complete, uncomprehending shock. Arthur Pendleton pulled a chair from the wall and sat down, not at the head of the table, but directly across from Imani, as an equal. "Dr. Hayes, Imani," he began, his eyes holding a profound sincerity. "First, I must offer you my deepest, most sincere apology. What I have put you and your family through these past weeks is inexcusable. It was a cruel and manipulative ordeal, and for the pain it has caused, I am truly sorry." I don't understand," Imani stammered, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a dizzying confusion. "The lawsuit?" "There is no lawsuit," Arthur said gently. "The letters were real, but the suit was never filed with any court. The media leaks were carefully placed by my own team and can be retracted and corrected just as easily. This entire nightmare was a test." "A test?" The word was a hollow echo. "A terrible test," he admitted, a look of genuine regret on his face. "But one I felt was necessary. Please understand, I have spent 50 years building an empire. In that time, my wealth has acted like a poison on human relationships. It attracts greed like carrion attracts flies. I have been betrayed by partners, lied to by friends, encircled by family members who see me as a walking vault. Genuine kindness, Dr. Hayes, without an angle, without an ulterior motive. It's something I had almost ceased to believe in. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. And then, on that airplane, I was facing the end. I was terrified. And out of the chaos, you appeared. You were calm, you were competent, you were a force of nature. But it was your children who broke through my cynicism. I saw your son, that brave boy, standing guard over the situation. And your daughter, his voice grew thick, and he had to pause. I felt her hand in mine. It was so small. I heard her crying, not with fear, but with empathy for a stranger. In that moment, I was given the rarest of gifts, a glimpse of pure, unadulterated human goodness. So when I recovered, I was faced with a question. Was it real? Or was it the most brilliant performance I had ever seen? I had to know. I had to see what you were made of when the pressure was applied. So I designed this monstrous crucible. I had Cassandra, my oldest and most trusted friend, and a brilliant actress, it turns out, do everything in her power to break you. We took your job. We ruined your name. We threatened you with utter ruin. We offered you an easy way out that would only cost you your soul. He shook his head, a look of genuine wonder in his eyes. And you did not break. You stood in the fire and you did not burn. You told the truth. You chose your honor and the honor of your family over everything. You, Dr. Hayes, are real. Your goodness is real. Tears were now flowing freely down Imani's cheeks. Tears of relief so profound they felt like they were coming from the deepest part of her. The tension that had been a steel band around her chest for weeks finally snapped. As of this morning, Arthur continued, his tone shifting to one of brisk resolution, the board of your hospital has been informed of the true situation. Your administrative leave is revoked, a formal apology from them is forthcoming, and your full back pay is being wired to your account, along with a substantial settlement for the emotional distress my actions have caused. But that is just fixing what I broke, he said, pushing a thick, leather-bound portfolio across the table toward her. That is not a thank you. This is a thank you. Imani stared at the portfolio, her hands trembling too much to reach for it. Don't just give a man a fish, the saying goes. I don't want to just write you a check. I want to invest in your character. Inside that folder is the charter and full initial funding for the Hayes Foundation for Community Health, a $20 million endowment to establish and run a nonprofit clinic anywhere you choose. You will be the director. You will answer to no one but your own conscience. You will practice medicine the way you see fit for the people who need it most without ever having to worry about an insurance form or a hospital budget again. Your student loans, by the way, were paid off an hour ago, he smiled, and I haven't forgotten your children. For Noah, who showed the steady hand of a leader, we are offering a standing, mentored internship in the aerospace division of Pendleton Industries. He can start next summer. We will guide him, challenge him, and if he wishes, fund his university education in engineering and guarantee him a position upon graduation. We need more men with his courage and composure. And for Maya, he said, his voice softening, for her profound empathy, a child who holds a dying man's hand is a treasure. We have established an irrevocable educational trust in her name. It will be more than enough to allow her to attend any university in the world, to pursue any passion she chooses, from art history to social work to medicine. Her future will be limited by nothing but the scope of her own dreams. Imani finally broke down completely, dropping her head into her hands and sobbing with a force that shook her entire body. It was the sound of a soul being unburdened, of a spirit being released from a cage. David Chen, her lawyer, just sat beside her, speechless, tears welling in his own eyes as he patted her shoulder awkwardly. Arthur Pendleton stood and walked around the table. He placed a gentle hand on her shaking shoulder. You saved my life, Dr. Hayes, he said, his voice filled with a quiet, powerful gratitude. The very least I can do is give you and your children the life you were always meant to live. Later, after Arthur and his team had departed, Imani and David rode the elevator down in the stunned silence. When the doors opened to the lobby, Imani walked forward and pushed open the heavy glass doors of the skyscraper. The rain had stopped. The sun had broken through the clouds, casting long, golden shafts of light down the street. She stepped out into the warmth and took a deep, shuddering breath. It was the first breath of the rest of her life. She reached into her pocket and closed her hand around the small, smooth stone. It was still warm. The monsters were gone. Dr. Imani Hayes' story is a powerful testament to the idea that true character isn't revealed when things are easy, but in the face of overwhelming adversity. She was pushed to the absolute brink, her life's work and her family's security threatened by the very person she saved. But she never wavered in her integrity. The incredible twist wasn't just that she was rewarded, but how she was rewarded, not with a simple lottery win, but with opportunities that honored the unique strengths of her and her children. It's a profound reminder that sometimes the universe's greatest tests are prerequisites for its greatest gifts. What she endured was a nightmare, but what she earned was a legacy. If this story of resilience, integrity, and unexpected justice moved you, please give this video a like to help it reach more people. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that doing the right thing matters, even when it's hard. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories that will restore your faith in humanity.